Did you kill my father?
No, I didn't, no.
And then King offered this.
I believe you, and my family believes you.
Good evening. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, 39 years old and a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and the leader of the nonviolent civil rights movement in the United States, was assassinated in Memphis tonight. A sniper's bullet cut down Dr. King as he stood on a hotel balcony in Memphis. Within an hour, Dr. King was dead. That happened at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The nation was shocked. President Johnson expressed horror and then postponed his trip to Hawaii until tomorrow.
In a single moment, one of the greatest figures in American history had his life tragically cut short. Martin Luther King Jr., the great uniter who helped overcome the dark side of American history, a history of government-ran slavery, where the government not only considered African Americans lesser citizens, but essentially considered them less than human. A history that goes long past the abolishment of slavery to Jim Crow laws, which were government-mandated segregation based on skin color. Martin Luther King Jr. showed the world that the government was wrong by preaching civil disobedience, turning the other cheek, because when government police officers, government officials beat back African American protesters, and those protesters didn't hit back, it was evident who was in the right and who was in the wrong. Shortly after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, James Earl Ray was arrested. He would quickly confess to the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But only 3 days after his confession, he recanted, claiming that he was coerced. He stated that he didn't know anything about the assassination, that he was set up. Let's take a look at the evidence. I think you might be shocked by what we discover.
Like the assassinations of John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert, the murder of Martin Luther King Jr. is a case that refuses to be closed. 9 years later, a special committee of Congress is investigating the crime. The Attorney General of the United States has publicly said he wants to talk to the man who sits in prison as the assassin. It was on April 4th, 1968, that Dr. King was shot in Memphis, Tennessee. In June, James Earl Ray was arrested in England for the crime. What we subsequently heard about Ray was that he was an escaped convict who had been on a strange year-long odyssey winding up in Memphis. What we heard from Ray was that his travels had been directed and financed by an underworld character he knew only as Raoul. It seemed a simple case when James Earl Ray pleaded guilty, but just 3 days later he recanted, claiming that he'd been railroaded into the plea by his own attorney, Percy Foreman. For 8 years, the courts have refused to grant him a new trial. For 8 years, the questions about a possible conspiracy have persisted, and all this time, Ray has declined to tell his side of the story on television. Until I went to interview Ray last week at Brushy Mountain Penitentiary in Tennessee, where he is serving a 99-year sentence as the assassin of Martin Luther King Jr. Did you fire the shot that killed Dr. Martin Luther King?
No, and I think now, based on investigations of those who have represented me, that we could prove it through some type of judicial proceedings.
6:01 p.m. Immediately after Dr. King was shot, people with him pointed toward a rooming house across the street. Ray had rented a room there that day. The state claims he fired the fatal shot from there. Ray says he has an alibi. Now, this, of course, is critical.
Yes.
As your recollection as to where you were between, let us say, 5:50 p.m. and just after 6 o'clock, April 4th, 1968. You remember going to the service station?
Yes.
Having the tire fixed?
I didn't have it fixed. They said that something was busy. It was a business hour, something they didn't have time for it. And I never did get the tire fixed. My point is that you were not in the rooming house, or were you, between, let's say, after 5:30 p.m.? No, I'm positive I wasn't in there after 5:30.
Well, let me take you back to that day in the courtroom, when you had your day in court. Short day it was. The judge asked you whether you were doing it voluntarily, the guilty plea, and you said yes, sir. I can't understand if you knew that you didn't pull the trigger on the gun that killed Dr. King,
why you would go that far and say those things. Well, this was all decided on March the 9th, the day before the plea was entered. At that time, I determined that there was no way that I could force the person for me to go on trial with any prospect of success. But I assumed that if I did enter a plea of guilty, and I could have had an investigation after the plea with newly discovered evidence, there's a possibility that the case could have been reversed and went to trial. That same day, when you entered your guilty plea, there was a whole series of questions involving the voluntary nature of your plea. That you knew what you were doing, that you weren't being forced, that you knew you were giving up your right to appeal. All of those things were laid out to you. And you answered to all of those, yes, you knew what you were doing. If I had it all to do over again, I really don't see how I could have done anything different. If somebody else did it, why sit here silent? Why not tell everything you know and do everything you can to find the other people? Well, I don't know. I think a lot of people have a sort of a Pollyanna view of the legal system. All you got to do is go to the prosecutor and say, oh, here's what it is that turned me loose. No, that's it. That's not the way it is. If you testify to the prosecutor, he'll just use what you tell him to weave it in his story. It doesn't necessarily mean he's going to turn you out or anything like that.
It has been held that all employees of a municipality may not strike for any purpose.
The Memphis Police Department is not concerning itself with the negotiations regarding the city sanitation department.
The residents of Memphis can expect their garbage and trash to continue piling up. These men are pretty determined that they want to clean up the city, but they're not going to do it under the conditions that they elect.
NationalArchives.gov. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Memphis sanitation workers. During a heavy rainstorm in Memphis on February 1st, 1968, 2 black sanitation workers had been crushed to death when the compactor mechanism of the trash truck was accidentally triggered. On the same day, in a separate incident also related to inclement weather, 22 black sewer workers had been sent home without pay while their white supervisors were retained for the day with pay. About 2 weeks later, on February 12th, more than 1,100 of a possible 1,300 black sanitation workers began a strike for job safety, better wages, benefits, and union recognition. Mayor Henry Loeb, unsympathetic to most of the workers' demands, was especially opposed to the union. Black and white civic groups in Memphis tried to resolve the conflict, but the mayor held fast to his position. Martin Luther King Jr., who had agreed to lend his support to the sanitation workers, spoke at a rally in Memphis on March 18th and promised to lead the large march and work stoppage planned for later in the month. Unfortunately, the demonstration on March 28th turned sour when a group of rowdy students at the tail end of the long parade of demonstrators used the signs they carried to break windows of businesses. Looting ensued. The march was halted, the demonstrators dispersed, and King was safely escorted from the scene. About 60 people had been injured, and one young man, a looter, was killed. This episode prompted the city of Memphis to bring a formal complaint in the district's court against King, Hosa Williams, James Bevel, James Orange, Ralph Abernathy, and Bernard Lee, King associates in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. According to the House Select Committee on Assassinations, which was allegedly tasked with investigating the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the peaceful March 28, 1968 demonstrations turned violent when a couple of young African-American members of a group known as the Invaders incited violence at the end of the march. As part of the investigation by the House Select Committee on Assassinations, the question was asked, did the FBI pay members of the Invaders, an organization of young black activists in Memphis, or act through its informants in the Invaders to incite the violence on March 28th that led Dr. King to return to Memphis? The committee found evidence that some members of the Invaders, resorting to inflammatory rhetoric and acts of violence, encouraged the disturbances that marred the sanitation workers' march. In its investigation of the Invaders, the committee took testimony from several former members. The organization had since been disbanded. some of whom had provided written releases authorizing the FBI to turn over their files, investigative or informant. In addition, the committee reviewed reports of invader activities in the files of the FBI and the Memphis Police Department and took testimony from FBI agents who controlled informants in Memphis and monitored the activities of groups and individuals connected with the Sanitation Strike. Finally, the committee took testimony from Merrill McCullough, an undercover Memphis police officer who had infiltrated the invaders in 1968. The investigation established the existence of 5 FBI informants who provided intelligence on the racial situation in the Memphis field office. The reporting touched on invader activities. The report, at the very least, shows that FBI informants were reporting on the activities of the invaders. The report's final conclusion was inconclusive as to whether the FBI used infiltration of the invaders to incite violence on March 28, 1968. Of course, this wouldn't be the first time that the CIA and FBI targeted Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
But Martin Luther King was also seen as an enemy of the state, with a capital S. The Federal Bureau of Investigations Director, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, is widely reported to have had a personal animosity bordering on obsession with King. And despite King's philosophy of nonviolence, Hoover feared he'd become a so-called messiah who would unify and galvanize a movement of militant black nationalism. Beginning shortly after King publicly criticized the FBI for failing to protect activists and black citizens, he became a prime target for the FBI's covert domestic intelligence program, more commonly known as COINTELPRO. According to FBI archival documents, quote, from late 1963 and continuing until the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., King was the target of an intensive campaign by the FBI to neutralize him as an effective civil rights leader. In the war against King, no holds were barred. The FBI's relentless surveillance of King, up to the moment of his death, sought to embarrass and discredit him and to neutralize the power of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. King was subjected to investigations of his inner circle, wiretaps, and monitoring to expose alleged communist activities. In one instance, he was sent a tape-recorded copy of extramarital affairs along with a letter that read, King, there is only one thing left for you to do. You know what it is. There is but one way out for you. You better take it before your filthy, fraudulent self is bared to the nation. The SCLC interpreted the letter as an attempt to blackmail King into taking his own life.
The Bureau went so far as to mail anonymous letters to Dr. King and his wife, which were mailed shortly before he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, and finishes with this suggestion. King, there is only one thing left for you to do. You know what it is. You have just 34 days in which to do it. This exact number has been selected for a specific reason. It has definite practical significance. It was 34 days before the award. You are done.
If I can interrupt, that was taken by Dr. King to mean a suggestion for suicide, was it not?
That's our understanding.
The King family is well aware of the United States government's history of targeting Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And contrary to what the media will have you believe, the King family is the biggest advocate for the innocence of James Earl Ray, the accused assassin.
I believe that the FBI had something to do with that conspiracy. It seems to me that the surveillance that my husband underwent as he traveled around the world by the FBI and the things that have already been revealed that are on record point toward the FBI having certainly known what was happening. And if there was some conspiracy there, that they should have known who the people were that were involved, because he was under constant surveillance. And I cannot believe that they would not have known about all the plots and all the people and where they were at various times.
In a prison hospital in Nashville, Tennessee today, another remarkable moment of a different kind altogether. This was a face-to-face meeting between the son of the late Martin Luther King Jr. and the man who was serving a 99-year sentence for his assassination. Here's NBC's Federico Whitfield.
Dexter King arrived at this Nashville prison to meet the man serving time for the death of his father, Dr. Martin Luther King. The youngest son wanted to look into the eyes of a terminally ill James Earl Ray and ask one question in particular.
Did you kill my father?
No, I didn't, no.
And then King offered this.
I believe you, and my family believes you, and we are going to do everything in our power to try and make sure that justice will prevail.
Their meeting became a 1-hour friendly encounter. King and Ray sat only 3 feet across from one another. King listened intently to a frail 69-year-old Ray who was battling liver disease. They talked briefly about Ray's health and of hope that the courts will soon give Ray the trial he never had.
Dexter King, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Take me back to the moment when you reached out and shook James Earl Ray's hand. What was that like?
It was very moving, a feeling of relief to finally meet face-to-face with the man who has been accused, but has since, from the beginning, said he was innocent. I continue to hear that he confessed, and in fact, he didn't confess. He pled guilty, which is different, technically speaking.
So when you asked him, did you kill my father, in no uncertain terms, and he said, no, I did not, why do you believe him?
Well, I believe him because there's so much new evidence that has been presented to me and my family vis-a-vis his attorney, Bill Pepper. Also, the fact of the matter is he has said from the beginning he was innocent. I asked him why he pled guilty. He said basically his attorney at the time cut a deal behind the scenes with the district attorney, and unbeknownst to him, he was forfeiting his rights to a trial. As soon as he found that out, 3 days later, he recanted and has since been trying to get a trial. So, spiritually speaking, I felt very moved by the meeting because for me and my family, it brings us closer to the process of reconciliation, healing, and ultimately closure.
You mentioned your family. Your mother, Coretta Scott King, was not at the meeting. I'm sure you talked to her afterward. What was her impression?
Well, she felt it was a very courageous thing to do for all of us. I mean, I think spiritually speaking, my family was there. They were not there in the flesh, but physically, but spiritually, very much supportive. I think everybody felt proud of the fact that we were now closer firsthand, not through hearsay or third-party representatives, but closer to getting at this truth.
Unfortunately for James Earl Ray, the United States government would never give him his day in court. But the King family got theirs in 1999.
Only 15 years ago, something else happened. Something that changed everything we knew about Martin Luther King's death. And yet, most people still don't know about it. 15 years ago, the only trial ever held concerning the murder of Martin Luther King Jr. was concluded. And no, it wasn't done in someone's basement under the cover of tinfoil hats. There wasn't anyone with the word Illuminati carved in their forehead. And no, the jury wasn't made up of beavers wearing bow ties. Because if it were, I would have been there. This was a real live trial between the King family and the conspirators who killed Martin Luther King. All right, this was real. In a civil trial in 1999, a jury found U.S. government agencies, along with others, guilty of assassinating MLK in Memphis in 1968. After hearing from 70 witnesses, including Lloyd Jowers, who assisted the sniper and owned Jim's Grill, from which the shot was fired, the jury took less than an hour to decide that 1, multiple government agencies were responsible for the murder. 2, James Earl Ray, the man we've always been told pulled the trigger, had nothing to do with it. And 3, the mainstream media is a stain on the soul of this country. A tarnish so deep and dark it makes the Bermuda Triangle look like a slip and slide. The 20th Special Forces Group was shown to have a sniper team at the location of King's murder. This is a significant development because snipers are good at putting bullets through things from a large distance away. Okay? And it just so happens Martin Luther King had a bullet shot through him from a large distance away. So you're telling me under U.S. law, the U.S. government has been found to have assassinated assassinated one of the 10 most courageous, most beloved American leaders, and most people in this country still don't know it? They were found guilty by a jury in 1999, and we never heard a word of it? Even if you're one of those people who want to go, it was a civil trial, that doesn't matter at all. Does that mean we're not entitled to hear about it and make our own decision? Because there was not a peep from the media.
The New York Times, May 23rd, 2000. Lloyd Jowers, 73, who claimed a role in the killing of Dr. King. Lloyd Jowers, the former Memphis cafe owner who maintained that he had hired someone other than James Earl Ray to assassinate Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, died on Saturday at a hospital in Tennessee. Mr. Jowers had lung cancer and had recently suffered a heart attack. Mr. Jowers ran a cafe on the ground floor of a rooming house from which prosecutors say a sniper fired the shot that killed Dr. King on April 4th, 1968. Mr. Ray confessed to the killing in 1969, but recanted and spent the rest of his life trying to prove his innocence. He died in prison in 1998. In an ABC television interview in 1993, Mr. Jowers said he had received $100,000 from a Memphis produce merchant, Frank Liberto, to arrange Dr. King's murder. Mr. Liberto had died by the time of the interview, in which Mr. Jowers said that he had hired the assassin and that it was not Mr. Ray, James Earl Ray. In December, Mr. Jowers and unknown conspirators were found liable in a wrongful death lawsuit brought by Dr. King's family. The jury awarded $100 to the Kings, who had asked for only token damages. This way, people couldn't say they did it for money. This from JusticeDepartment.gov, the official records of the King vs. Jowers civil court case. Jowers' 1993 televised primetime live appearance, which I have searched up and down all over the internet to find, and it is not anywhere, and I don't think that's by accident. December 1993. After his discussion with Saltman, Jowers agreed to an interview with ABC journalist Sam Donaldson. The interview aired on Primetime Live December 16, 1993. At Jowers' request, the network partially shaded his face, but broadcast his full name and the fact that he was from Memphis. Jowers' attorney Lewis Garrison also appeared on the program. During the interview, Jowers announced that he was indirectly involved in a conspiracy to kill Dr. King. He explained that Frank Liberto, a Memphis produce dealer, asked him to hire someone to assassinate Dr. Martin Luther King. Donaldson also reported that Jowers claimed to have received approximately $100,000 as part of the assassination plot at his grill sometime before the murder. Jowers further asserted that a man with a name sounding like Raoul brought a rifle box and asked him to hold it until he made arrangements or we made arrangements, one or the other of us, for the killing. According to Jowers, Liberto said that the police wouldn't be there and it'd be set up where it looked like someone else had done the killing. Jowers also added that he did not believe that James Earl Ray knew he was part of the plot. When Jowers revealed that he had hired the killer, his attorney, Garrison, abruptly terminated the interview, saying, "Jowers has gone as far as we can go." In an off-camera interview with program producer Ira Rosen, however, Jowers specifically named the assassin, identifying an African-American man who was found on South Main Street by police after the shooting. Notice that Jowers claims that a man named Raoul brought the assassination weapon. This corroborates what James Earl Ray had been saying for decades. For those of you not familiar with James Earl Ray's background, he was your petty thief. He robbed convenience stores, things of that nature. He was in prison and he broke out of jail, at which time he claims he was contacted by this man, Raoul, who hired him, paid him money to run guns into Canada and back to America. Raoul then had James Earl Ray stationed in Alabama when he paid him for the task, of running guns from Alabama to Memphis, Tennessee. These are the guns that Jowers says were used to kill Martin Luther King Jr. James Earl Ray was running guns, presumably for the government, although he probably didn't know it. And there's plenty of other evidence that suggests the government had created the perfect patsy in James Earl Ray and the perfect climate, the perfect setting for the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This released from FBI.gov. Freedom of Information and Privacy Acts. Subject Martin Luther King Jr. The Federal Bureau of Investigation. Memphis Police Department surveillance detail and removal of Detective Reddick from duty. From the time of Dr. King's return to Memphis on April 3, 1968, until the time of his assassination, he was under physical surveillance by the MPD, Memphis Police Department. Upon learning of Dr. King's flight schedule, Inspector J.P. Tynes of the Memphis Police Department Inspectional Bureau instructed two black plainclothes officers, Detective Edward E. Redditt and Patrolman Willie B. Richmond, to go to the airport to observe the arrival of Dr. King and to keep him under continuous surveillance in order to see with whom he came into contact. At approximately 4 p.m., Redditt, the black police officer on the Martin Luther King surveillance team, was ordered by telephone to leave the fire station and report to headquarters, where he was advised that a threat had been made against his life. He was therefore ordered to move his family into a motel under an assumed name, Frank Holloman. Redditt was taken home in a squad car, but refused to move his family because he had a sick relative. At about the time the squad car arrived in front of Redditt's house, it was announced on the radio that Dr. Martin Luther King had been shot. After a couple of days, Redditt did not hear any more about the threat to his life. In our efforts to trace the source of the threat, we have found that Philip R. Manuel, an investigator with the Senate Investigative Committee, chaired by Senator McKellen, was in Memphis on April 4, 1968. While at the Memphis Police Department, Manuel advised them, based on a telephone call to his office in Washington, that the Senate committee staff had information from an informant in Mississippi that the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party had made plans to kill a Negro lieutenant in Memphis. Additionally, details of two black firemen from Station No. 2. As of April 3, 1968, Norvell E. Wallace and Floyd E. Newsman were the only black firemen assigned to Fire Station No. 2 of the Memphis Fire Department. Wallace was working the night shift on April 3rd, and Newsom was scheduled to report for the day shift on April 4th. Both of these individuals actively supported the sanitation workers' strike, attending their rallies and making financial contributions. In our interview with Wallace, he stated that at about 10 or 10:30 on the night of April 3rd, his captain told him that a call had come in requesting that a man be detailed to Fire Station No. 33. He was immediately detailed to No. 33, although it was raining and he was prepared to go to bed. Wallace further stated that while Fire Station No. 33 was understaffed as a whole, there was no shortage of personnel for the pump truck on which he worked. Otherwise, he did not know why he was detailed to Station 33. Also, on the night of April 3rd, Fireman Newsom, in a wholly personal capacity, attended a rally at the Mason Temple where Dr. King made his last speech. When he returned home, there was a message for him to call Lieutenant J. Smith at the fire department. When he called, Lieutenant J. Smith ordered him to report to Fire Station No. 31 on the morning of April 4th rather than Fire Station No. 2. Newsom claims that Fire Station No. 31 was overstrength at the time and his detail made his company short. Moreover, he says he never received a satisfactory explanation as to why he was detailed. However, he did say that Lieutenant Barnett at one time told him he was detailed at the request of the police. It appears there was a concerted effort to have African American law enforcement personnel removed from the eventual site of the Martin Luther King Jr. assassination. Let me ask you this. Did you know that it's more than likely that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated by the government of the United States of America? And if you didn't, what does that tell you about the American education system, and what does that tell you about the American mainstream media? Did you know that in the 1970s, congressional hearings known as the Church Committee revealed that the CIA had infiltrated the American media, paid out billions of dollars worth of today's money to mainstream media journalists to essentially be propagandists for the government? The mainstream media works as propaganda, as a propaganda arm for the big corporations and the government of the United States of America. And speaking of the government, what does this report say about them? The government ran slavery. Slavery was a government-run program. Jim Crow was government-mandated segregation, incredible racism, authorized by the United States government and government force. Martin Luther King Jr. is more than likely to have been assassinated by the American government, his only crime being a uniter. Before John F. Kennedy died, before he himself was assassinated, he said that if it were up to him, he would splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces. But of course, like Martin Luther King Jr., those who fight the deep state find themselves assassinated. And Lyndon B. Johnson was the greatest beneficiary from JFK's assassination. The same Lyndon B. Johnson who was president when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. The same Lyndon Baines Johnson who put forth the Great Society, allegedly to help minorities. But by every economic measure, minorities have been worse off following the implementation of the quote-unquote Great Society. What does this report say about spy powers, the erosion of the Fourth Amendment, and the spy state? The CIA and FBI spied on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and he wasn't perfect. He had affairs. And then they threatened to out him about those affairs unless he would commit suicide. How's that for showing they wanted him dead? And what does that say about the continuation and the American public's approval of allowing the American spy state to grow? And finally, look how the CIA and the FBI infiltrated the invaders to subvert Martin Luther King's peaceful movement and make the public believe it was a violent movement. And of course, the mainstream media then echoes that there's violence coming from Martin Luther King Jr. and his movement. And of course, we've seen this today. Did you know that the Michael Brown protests were infiltrated? Did you know that the leader of the Charlottesville event, where the white supremacists wind up fighting against the communists of Antifa and someone wound up dead, the leader of that movement was an Occupy Wall Street supporter and an Obama supporter? Very strange for a white supremacist to be an Obama supporter. The same practices that the government used to make Martin Luther King Jr. look bad, to blackmail Martin Luther King Jr., and ultimately to assassinate Martin Luther King Jr. are used today. Just this past year, 2016, Project Veritas released undercover video of the top members of the Democratic Party admitting on camera that they paid mentally ill people to show up at Trump rallies and incite violence, because then the media would report that people that were Trump supporters were violent. These same practices go on today. If you want to honor Martin Luther King Jr. and everything he stood for, then you have to take the time to understand history. Because understanding history and the methods that the evil people in the United States government use will help you understand what's happening in the present world. We as a society need a return to liberty. It is the sophists, it is the government and the media who try to convince people that increasing government power makes society a better place. But in reality, what we're doing is allowing the same institutions that assassinated Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to metaphorically assassinate the American dream.
So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will they be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. Dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. This is our hope. This is a faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, my country tears of thee. Sweet land of liberty of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. And so let freedom ring. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From the heightening Alleghanies of Pennsylvania, let freedom ring. From the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado, let freedom ring. From the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring praying from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city. We will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last.